Let's do this. Okay, so Polaroids also hold a special place in my heart. Just like Brian, I was actually introduced to Polaroid photography when I worked at my after-school job in high school at a locally owned photo store here, and was gifted this beautiful 1972 piece of equipment by a coworker, which then piqued my interest and had me enroll in like this really short photo class that we had at my high school. And I was introduced to the physicality of photography, specifically with the transfer process for Polaroids. So this was my very first one, a 19-year-old Polaroid transfer. And then that led me to purchase this 1980s, 90s day lab, which enlarges your 35 millimeter slide onto and then projects onto Polaroid film. So I could actually have a bit more control with the imagery and not rely on the camera, but on the unpredictability of the actual film. So I brought that with me to college and played around as I pursued my degree in photojournalism in a pretty intense degree program. So this led me to go to the art school, and I took some classes, and I continued playing around with that transfer process, but like never quite got as good as that like old very first one that I had. So I ran on this bridge a lot in college, and then I decided like that this bridge needed to have a different feeling, and I used that same technology with the Polaroid image, but used it as an emulsion lift. So that peel apart film is actually a paper back. You soak it in hot water, and the back comes off or separates from that emulsion layer, which is like a gelatin chemical that forms the image. And then you have a substrate, which here is watercolor paper, but I started to really love working with canvas. And so it was more malleable, it was more forgiving, it had more texture. And so any of my side projects in the studio at university, I would kind of like take those fun fashion projects for friends and try my hand at these emulsions again. And it was really like a place of solace for me. So moving forward to my first job in DC, I then moved to London and worked in a university darkroom and was introduced to cyanotypes. So another chemical process using UV light, but I could take my digital images, create a negative, and cover the paper with this chemical, and then use the UV light. So there was less technical equipment needed, which I really was excited about. And I felt like I was kind of stepping into my first experience of experiencing, what I saw in a more tactile way. And as I lived in Europe and traveled, I would shoot, I think we all have these in our camera roll, those like boring, mundane landscape images. And this was just, I think, off a bus in France. And I really liked taking that the viewer and photographer veil down, and having the viewer actually experience the layered elements to a landscape they might not have experienced, but almost do feel like they're experiencing, having a dreamlike, ethereal feeling. And when I got back to the States, I was pushed by a dear friend of mine to put these in frames and kind of venture into the fine art world, which I had never thought to do, but was actually very fun to create a show, exhibit, and curate these pieces and see the interactions between the audience and these works. So this was continued even into a personal project I did in Mongolia. And I brought back a number of digital images and portraiture and things that were publishable, but in reality, I mostly was drawn to creating these delicate landscapes, and even pursued a collaboration with a good friend of mine who's an abstract artist, who could then really like continue to push that one of a kind piece of photography that I kept looking for, by painting on my work and using his own voice on top of my perspective. And getting, I guess, further into the fine art world, I had just gone on a trip to Iceland, and I created this body of work that I really wanted to play with not only climate the climate discussion, but also this tactile, delicate kind of feeling, and then trying to really understand how unique this process is. So, going at this particular image a number of times, trying to attain a kind of feeling with it, and not quite getting it until this final piece. But you can see that I have number of those that aren't even the same, which is kind of amazing and kind of fun in that photography medium in general. So yeah, I feel like these alternative processes are really a way that we can kind of engage with the landscape in a different way. And actually at that same show, this Iceland show, I pursued a new format, which was Gum by Chromate, which I was told I could control a lot more, which I could not. And I feel like this was a huge fail. But it was fun to experiment on scale and on different mediums. So I actually blew this up to kind of play with that shift in texture onto a linen backing, an upholstery linen actually. So that's almost a 4.5 foot piece. So not quite there yet, still working on this kind of like process, but I'm excited to continue and mess around with that. So in the same realm as Brian, I would say no matter what process you're using, do print your photos. This is just a tray at my house that I've been sticking in cards that I send to people over the pandemic, and sticking on my sourdough bread that I, bake and hand to a neighbor. And it's just fun to hand memories and tangibly hold those moments. So thank you.
Woohoo, Caty, that was so nice.